We gather together in different ways this morning. From computer screens and telephones, we gather reaching out across the wires, waving from a safe distance to come together in fellowship. From living room to front porch, we gather as we are able, ready to be of service to each other, to the world, ready to build the community of hope and of love. As we face this bright morning, we are apart, but we are together, offering our love, our commitment, our hope, and our prayers in service to one another in this world. It is a new way, but an old way, that we come together in worship today.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, whoever you're leaving, cause it's no caravan hour is standing, cause it's no caravan hour is living, cause it's no caravan hour is standing, cause it's no caravan hour is living, cause it's no caravan hour is standing, cause it's no caravan hour is living, cause it's no caravan hour is standing, cause it's no caravan hour is living, cause it's no caravan hour is standing, cause it's no caravan hour is living, cause it's no caravan hour is living, cause it's no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come.
I am watching you, looking at the candles or the darkness in between them. This is the blessing that we have kindled, this particular dark. If you stand facing me, this is what you will find. The gap between us where our common lives take shape. The space between us that we reach into for love. And you and I are caught between the candles, where we cannot help but live in the close and infinite abundance, held between the dying and the kindling of the light.
Please recite with me our shared affirmation of mission. This fellowship is a welcoming, diverse, and nurturing beloved community that promotes progressive religious thought and practice to create a more loving, just, and sustainable world.
turn not for hate, and come together for justice and equal rights. Be strong, be the light, and keep up the good fight. Be strong, be the light, and keep up the good fight. Be strong, be the light, and keep up the good fight. Keep up the good fight. The arc of the moral universe is long. Non-violence is the weapon of the strong. We cannot change the past. The future's in our hands. To build a world that's fair for everyone. Be strong, be the light, and keep up the good fight. Be strong, be the light, and keep up the good fight. Be strong, be the light, and keep up the good fight. Keep up the good fight. All colors, all faiths, and all creeds. Difference, the essence of humanity. It's not how much you take, it's the difference that you make. Embrace the dream of this reality. Be strong, be the light, and keep up the good fight. Be strong, be the light, and keep up the good fight. Be strong, be the light, and keep up the good fight. Keep up the good fight. It takes courage to face the problems that we see. From climate change to police brutality, the people are rising up to say we've had enough. It's time has come to shift from me to we. Be strong, be the light, and keep up the good fight. Be strong, be the light, and keep up the good fight. Be strong, be the light, and keep up the good fight. Keep up the good fight. Keep up the good fight.
Deep calls unto deep. Joy calls unto joy. Light calls unto light. Let the kindling of this flame rekindle in us the inner light of love, of peace, of hope. And as one flame lights another, nor grows the less. We pledge ourselves to be bearers of the light wherever we are.
9 Spoons is based on an actual incident that occurred in a Nazi camp just before the end of World War II. One of these Holocaust survivors wrapped a little menorah in rags and kept it with her. She came to America in the late 1940s and told this story in an interview.
It was the winter before the war ended, a cold, dreary time. Early one morning, Leah crawled into my bunk and poked me until I woke. There were 7 children in our barracks, but I felt closest to Leah, maybe because she was the youngest, only 4 years old. In spite of the cold, I crawled out of my bunk and walked with the excited little girl to the only one doorway in our barracks. Sure enough, heavy white flakes were falling down the dusky sky. Snow covered the bare ground around the bunker. It is beautiful. Now, you must come back to bed. It's still night. I took her into my bunk, and she snuggled between Razel, my bunkmate, and me. Leah soon fell asleep, but we had awakened Razel. It's the first snow of winter.
It's Kislev already. Soon it will be Hanukkah. The children should have a menorah. I could make one. I could make one out of spoons, but I would need 9 spoons.
Razel had been an artist before the war. She was so good with her hands. In the camp, she worked in the sewing room, repairing the uniforms of Nazi guards. Sometimes she smuggled out a needle and enough thread to stitch together the rags that we wore. If anyone could figure out a way to make a menorah, surely Razel could do it. But how to get the spoons and so many? In the camp, spoons were valued like gold. When we first came to the camp, everyone received a metal bowl to hold watery soup and scraps of food they gave us. But getting a spoon, that was our own problem. Whoever had one was able to scoop up every last drop of food. So how could we possibly gather 9 precious spoons to make a menorah?
I had a spoon. I took it with me wherever I went and even slept with it at night. Razel, if you share your spoon with me at mealtime, I'll give you my spoon for the menorah.
Of course I'll share.
Now we have 1 spoon.
Just then, we heard someone tap on the bottom of our bunk. Hindle had heard us talking.
Miriam and I will share a spoon. Now we have 2 spoons.
That morning, walking through the slush to get to the factory where I worked, I saw a piece of metal glittering in the mud. It was an old, bent spoon, a miracle. Since hundreds of women walked that way each day, there was no way to find out which poor soul had dropped it.
Now we had 3 spoons.
That evening, as we stood in line for some food, Hindle came up behind me and quickly thrust something cold into my hand. It was a beautiful silver teaspoon.
It was in the pocket of a suit. My job was to sort through mountains of valuable things for the guards, things they had taken away from us as soon as we came to the camp. Jewelry, clothing, combs, even pictures of our family. Don't tell where it came from. I could get into terrible trouble for keeping the spoon, but I wanted to help with the menorah. Now we have 4 spoons.
That cold night, as we huddled together for warmth, Miriam bent down and pushed 2 pieces of metal into my bunk. I felt them in the darkness. They were rusty. The handles were cracked, but they were spoons. Where did you get them? I asked in amazement.
I found them in the garbage. I work in the kitchen. If I had been caught taking spoons or anything out of the garbage, I could have been badly punished by the guards.
Now we have 6 spoons. A few days later, Libra brought in 2 more spoons, nearly new. We worried that the guards would find out. Would they take away our spoons? What would they do to us?
Don't worry. All the women in the camp know about the menorah, but it's still a secret from the guards. I washed the clothes and cleaned the house of one of the guards. For doing this, he offered me some extra food.
Even though she, like the rest of us, felt hungry all the time, she told him she wanted spoons instead.
Now we have 8 spoons. It was just 2 days before Hanukkah, and we still needed 1 more spoon for the menorah.
I thought about it all day while I worked. We whispered about it and we ate our watery soup and stale bread.
We wondered about it as we lay awake on the hard boards that were our beds.
Before I fell asleep that night, I asked Hashem to please send us one more spoon for our menorah.
Finally, on the last night before Hanukkah, a young woman we have never seen before brought us a rough handmade spoon. It was my sister's, was all she said.
Because of everyone's sacrifice, we had 9 spoons.
Early the next morning, Razel woke me quietly.
Look,
There, between us, in our bunk, stood a menorah for the children.
I had twisted the handles of the 9 spoons into a stem and stuck it into a piece of wood so it would stand. I had bent the round parts back to hold the flames. The shemesh spoon could be picked up to light the others and replaced in the base.
The women woke up, anxious to see Razel's handiwork. They crowded around her, amazed and delighted with the little menorah.
That night, when it seemed safe, I gathered all the children to the space in front of our bunk. I filled the first spoon and the shamash with fat that I had saved from the kitchen.
I rolled 2 wicks from some cotton thread I had brought from the sewing room.
With one of the matches I got from a worker in the factory, I lit the shamash.
We whispered the blessings together. All the women, the children too.
Everyone held their breath as I took the shamash and lit the first Hanukkah light. It was our own special Hanukkah miracle.
Our sermon today is entitled Wax, Wick, and Kerosene, Illuminating the Darkness. In the beginning, darkness covered the face of the deep, and then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness, and so on and so forth. Hebrew scripture famously begins this way. And from that first day onward, for millennia, and through all the begets and the betrayals and all the rebellion and the righteousness, humankind has sought to kindle light against darkness. Yet rarely do light bearers act alone. We find genuinely few compelling stories in history, religious or otherwise, of lone rangers facing down the darkness with a lone torch. More typically, the kindling of light against darkness is a communal enterprise. Tribes, modern and ancient, as foreign as the Maccabees and as familiar as this congregation, almost instinctively band together to counter darkness with the radiance of their combined light, spirit, resourcefulness, decency, courage, and compassion. As Terry Tempest Williams so eloquently tells us in her book, Listening to the Land, our desires and our hearts melt into everyone else's, and these are the desires of our highest selves. Light emanates from those desires, the ones that are enlightened rather than self-serving. The theme of our worship today, wax, wick, and kerosene, provide a multitude of inspiring examples of communal light bearing. First, we look to those Maccabees from the ancient Hanukkah story, a ragtag force who banded together to reclaim their temple. Sorely outnumbered by their Syrian oppressors, they stormed down the hill bravely from the hills together. In victory, they toiled together to obtain the oil necessary to defy the darkness of religious persecution by rekindling an eternal flame of faith together in their rededicated temple. As the story famously goes, that flame endured for 8 days, even though there was only realistically enough oil for 1 day. A testament to faith precious to Jews worldwide as they commence this year's socially distanced Hanukkah celebration on December 11th. To that saga, we add the more recent but equally heroic World War II story, 9 Spoons, by Marcy Stillerman. In this true tale, it took an entire bunkhouse of women and children together to contribute their precious spoons to craft their crude, handcrafted, but magnificent children's menorah. Through self-sacrifice and courage, this tribe, bound by a horrific circumstance and heritage, defied the darkness of evil together in order to celebrate Hanukkah, a festival of justice, even in the deep shadows of a concentration camp. Why justice? Well, Hanukkah took place in Israel during a period of suffering called the exile of darkness. For 180 years, the Jews were not allowed to practice their religion. This was darkness, because nothing is as dark as the enslavement of the human mind, heart, and spirit, or estrangement from your source of spirituality or God. This was darkness for them, the exile of darkness, because it took away the very light of their religion, the light of Yahweh. But the Jews fought back against this darkness, and they won. Hanukkah expresses this victory of light over darkness, of justice over oppression. Who inspires you or comes to mind as a light bearer against the darkness in our wounded world? Activist Greta Thunberg or Malala Yousafzai, civil rights icon John Lewis, Patrisse Cullors, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, Madonna Thunderhawk, a protest leader at Standing Hawk. Where will you light your candle against the darkness? In our own midst, we find inspiring examples too of everyday faith and courage and tenacious light bearing in the face of darkness and despair and the COVID pandemic, which has separated us physically. In the words of the Reverend Lynn Unger, we are caught between candles, and many of us are anticipating a bluer season than usual. Even so, this community is loving and strong, and you've illuminated the path for your fellow congregants as they've traversed the darkest valleys, including this one. Through the simplest but deepest practice of compassion and love, you've kindled wicks of faith and hope and grief and acceptance together. The light will not go out at the SedonaUU Fellowship, and we will kindle candles together, face to face, again, as soon as we can. And lastly, I offer one more story, a true story that miraculously ties all the others together. If nothing else, it proves that you don't have to be Jewish to find yourself cast in a gripping modern-day Hanukkah story. Giltha the goat lady was not Jewish, not a Maccabee, not a resident of a labor camp bunkhouse, likely not a Unitarian Universalist, but who knows. She is an eccentric mountain woman in tattered clothes living in the Pacific Northwest. A keeper of goats, of course, each of which wore a small bell around its neck on its collar. Giltha had a neighbor named Bill, a transplant from Iowa, who loved the Northwest wilderness, except for the long winters. Bill hadn't realized until he relocated that he suffered from seasonal affective disorder, which meant that the long periods of winter darkness brought on a serious paralyzing depression. His wife, Debbie, bought additional kerosene lamps and did what she could to shower Bill with all the available sunlight or northern exposure available to them. One afternoon, a big storm came, somewhat unexpectedly, and it looked to Debbie like it might snow for a very long time. Worse still, she realized a bit too late that they were nearly out of kerosene. They had barely enough for one night. Sound familiar? How would Bill endure in the darkness for days on end? Debbie grew desperate. She picked up her phone, which was a party line that she and Bill shared with 16 other residents in their remote wilderness neighborhood, and she called the nearest neighbor, more than a mile away, and explained her dilemma. But it was already cold, too cold, and there was already too much snowfall, and nothing could be done. Bill lay down for a nap, and Debbie gazed out the window at the snow and the enclosing darkness. Perhaps the fire in the wood stove would be ample. Maybe the snow would stop and we could get some kerosene. Night came and the lamp flickered lower and lower. Debbie looked out on the frozen landscape, wept and prayed. Time passed and Debbie picked up a faint jingling sound outside her window. At first she ignored it, probably just the wind howling in the trees or hitting the window, but it grew louder and more distinct. She gazed out to see 16 twinkling lanterns moving down a snowbound lane toward their cabin. Unbeknownst to Debbie and Bill, every resident on the party line had been listening in. What a surprise. And together they devised a plan. Led by Giltha and her goats through the darkness, they each carried what kerosene they could spare. Together it was enough to keep the cabin illuminated for, you guessed it, 8 days. An accidental Hanukkah miracle. Bill did not descend further into darkness. Debbie felt less isolated, and Giltha didn't seem like such an intimidating oddball, after all. Wax, wick, and kerosene, an eternal flame in a temple, a menorah in a labor camp, candles in a virtual sanctuary, lanterns in the Northwest wilderness. They each decree, let there be light in the void. Let the light of memory and hope shine forth, and may the sparks that spring eternal from the heart illumine us with courage and kindness, joy and faith. Back in 2002, the children of the UU Church of Reading, Massachusetts, where I was serving as minister, commissioned a 9 spoons menorah in memory of an 8-year-old child in the congregation named Faith, who had tragically died of cancer. How apt that the text of the piece that the choir offered that morning was called With Perfect Faith. The words had been found inscribed on a cave wall in Cologne, where Jews had been hiding in World War II. Caves are dark places that ache for illumination. The composer, Alan Friedman, had explained that his cantata speaks of the beauty and strength of the Jewish faith, reminding us that even in the depths of the Holocaust, Jews found time to celebrate life, and now, after the tragedy, that life and beauty still exist. What makes Friedman label this faith perfect? I'd argue that its perfection emanates not so much from its brilliance, but rather from its steadfastness, a faith that may flicker, but can never be extinguished, even by the most harrowing darkness. My colleague, the Reverend Thomas Perchlik, reminds us that this is our purpose, to release the light that has been hidden in the boxes of fear and alienation and self-absorption. Each life is a little bit like a flame. In the vastness of the universe, it may seem small, and at the end of our lives, if it passes back to the universe, it becomes a bigger light. And even so, no matter how small you think your light is, let it shine, and it can be a great example for others. It can light the path. We must remember and honor the dark in order to release our own capacity to illuminate it. Our light is ultimately part of the light of 1,000 flames rising at once. And when we share this light, bring it together, it grows brighter and brighter, even in this wounded world, even as the world darkens. And we are surely living in a strange and troubling time of darkness. Yet darkness cannot drive out darkness, according to the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. It cannot. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Whatever life may bring, it is my hope, for the sake of our children and our world, that we will let love lead our lives, and that wherever we go, we are luminaria on the way. Consider this question. If innocent human beings freezing in a labor camp, or sequestered in a cave, or experiencing the death of a beloved child, can continue to celebrate life and embrace joy and beauty, and if a tribe of near strangers on a party line can trudge through the frozen darkness to deliver kerosene, can we too kindle within ourselves the courage to keep on keeping faith and help others do likewise? This is my wish and my prayer for all of us gathered today, in the hope that we will be together when COVID passed, having kept faith with one another. The bravery and unquenchable spirit of the heroes and heroines of my stories today set the standard. Each year, when we kindle the flames of a menorah, may each candle and the memory it holds be valued so highly that we allow its light to lead us away from darkness and towards joy and justice together. And when we light the chalice each week, the symbol of our free faith, may the light we kindle be to us a symbol of the holiness we seek, shedding a sweet light, shining with glory, retelling timeless stories as we offer anew our testaments to faith. Don't let your light go out. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Blessed be, blessed we, and amen.
Now is the time for silent meditation. We join together today in a time of meditation. As we enter into the silence, we remember the many connections that sustain us in our religious community. In the silence now, we sit surrounded by these many connections, visible and invisible, that remind us every day that we are not alone. Now is a time for silent meditation.
We have been warmed by fires we did not build,
We have drunk at wells we did not dig. In gratitude of our many blessings and many needs, this morning's offering for this community will now be received.
When I am down and oh my soul so weary, when troubles come and my heart burden be, then I am still and waiting in the silence until you come and sit a while with me. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. There is no life without its hunger. Each restless heart beats so imperfectly. But when you come and I am filled with wonder, sometimes I think I glimpse eternity. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on stormy seas.
I will light candles this season, candles of joy despite all the sadness, candles of hope where despair keeps watch, candles of courage for fears ever present, candles of peace for tempest-tossed days, candles of grace to ease heavy burdens, candles of love to inspire all my living, candles that will burn a full year long.
Mary, it is will the summery last with full song. Och, nor naked wind is blast and weather strong. Aye, what this nicht is long, and ich weiß well Michel wrong. Sorrow and mourn and fast. Marie, 'tis will the summery last with full song. Och, nor naked wind is last and weather strong. Aye, what this nicht is long, and ich wit well Michel wrong. Sorrow and mourn and fast.
The aspen, oak, and maple trees with emerald, gold, and ruby leaves dance in whirling dervish air like crumpled now against the stair. So blow, ye north winds, blow, and bring the rain and snow. The whales and geese are heading south to leave behind the cold. So blow, ye north winds, blow. The farmer's plow sits in the shed, the miller grinds the flour for bread, the fox and bear for sleep prepare, for winter's frost is drawing near. So blow, ye north winds, blow, and bring the rain and snow. The whales and geese are heading south to leave behind the cold. So blow, ye north winds, blow. The pumpkin fields growing sweet, the fruits and nuts fall from the trees. For harvest feast we gather round and thank the sacred fertile ground. So blow, ye north winds, blow, and bring the rain and snow. The whales and geese are heading south to leave behind the cold. So blow, ye north winds, blow. Bleak and bitter, darkest night, December solstice dressed in white. The spicy wassail bowl is made, the mistletoe and Yule log laid. So blow, ye north winds, blow, and bring the rain and snow. The whales and geese are heading south to leave behind the cold. So blow, ye north winds, blow. Another year draws to an end. Make your peace with foe and friend. Ancient time waits for no one. Be ye old or ever young. So blow, ye north winds, blow, and bring the rain and snow. The whales and geese are heading south to leave behind the cold. So blow, ye north winds, blow, ye north winds, blow, ye north
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.